Let me just make some opening comments as we start here. It's always difficult to have a conversation with someone over an item that you disagree about. And we've known that all our life, but wow, has that been amplified during this COVID mandate time? And what we're noticing, and maybe you're finding it too, is that people are so divided over their opinions that they are unable to have conversation. Families can't talk about it. Friendships are lost over this. And businesses and ministries are divided. And we have to wonder, well, whatever happened to robust dialogue? Like, why can't we talk about things? So the focus of our call today is not to discuss COVID, and neither is it to discuss the mandate, but rather we want to discuss, how do you engage in conversation in this environment? So let's keep our conversation to that point. And actually, it's kind of an exercise right here of having a robust conversation amongst ourselves. We're friends, so let's just plan to stay that way. And part of what I recognize that when you're having a conversation about an emotional subject is that you get triggered. And we've talked about this in Crest, about being self-aware about your emotions, about being able to keep your emotions kind of on the side, not denying them, but keep them on the side and keep focused on the facts and the situation that we're talking about rather than how I'm feeling about things. But we are in a very weird place, friends. Things are happening I would never have dreamed possible in our culture. And the COVID focus has been ubiquitous for 18 months straight. And what surprises me is people are losing their jobs over an opinion, over their thought about something. And I never dreamed we'd have cancel culture where people would be taken off of YouTube or barred from Facebook or not allowed to have Twitter account. And these kind of have raised some red flags. And what I'd like to discuss with you is how do we get to this situation? And then we'll talk about, well, how do we talk? Any of you that have read history will recognize that there are some red flags here. We've seen this movie before in Russia, in Germany, and we actually need to have a robust conversation about this, taking a really brave look at what's going on. We need to search for truth. There needs to be a transparency about what we're trying to think and feel about. And we need help on this one because, boy, this has really gotten quite serious. So I'm going to share my screen. There is a clinical psychologist named Dr. Matthias Desmet. He's in Germany. He's got his PhD in clinical psychology. He also has a master's in statistics, and he's an expert on mass psychology. And after noticing that there were some anomalies in the statistical analysis that was being presented during the pandemic, he began to examine the statistics and the narrative, and he became quite concerned about what's going on in the narrative here. So he's actually an expert on mass psychology. And here's what's fascinating in what he's said. He's noticing that in this time where we're seeing, an alignment of so many, like government, business, even nations are all all on the same narrative. We've never seen this before. And he says, for mass psychological shaping to happen, there's 4 things that have to be in place. Let's see if this describes us. He said there have to be many socially isolated people where they don't have real relationships. And in that group, they lack an ability to do sense making. There's no clear social worldview that unifies everybody. It's just kind of all over the map. Then there's a free floating anxiety that is part of the culture, and also a free floating discontent. There's just this general sense of weirdness. And the psychologist, Dr. Desmet, says this set of things is very unsettling for people emotionally. It's very painful. He said it is very, very difficult for people to live this way for too long. And it just shows up in increased use of antidepressants and in suicides and in conflict. So he says, when there is something like this in place in cultures, then this can happen. If there is a threatening problem that looms, and then the leaders give a solution, it's presented as a collective battle against this threat that has come to the cultures. And what happens is all these people that are in this general anxiety and disconnected and not sure of what they think, they find a new social bond and a worldview around the threat and the answer, which are given simultaneously. And this general anxiety then becomes totally focused on the threat and the solution. And what happens is, because of the anxiety levels, they become radically intolerant of any challenge to the narrative. And simultaneously, they become radically tolerant of the leader who promises safety. Wow, interesting. He says this has happened numerous times in cultures. And so we can learn from the past. And he says, in general, here's what happens. Culture gets divided. He says, generally, about 30% will commit to the narrative that's provided by the leaders in the media. And then there are about 30% that will question the narrative and wonder and push back. And then there's 40% that are undecided, and they just don't know what to think. They just kind of want to keep their head down and not get hurt here and just see which way the wind is blowing and go with whatever is the least dangerous for them as they sense. This sure seems to describe pretty well the psychological environment that we're in. So how do we have a conversation when you have this going on? When you have such intense division of opinion and really very difficult to actually have a conversation.
Yeah, as we talked about this, the central piece that the Dr. Matthias Desmet focuses on is that whenever you have a context in which fear and anxiety is present, we tend to look for things that we can hold on to, that we can grab onto for some certainty. So this is where the problem that looms and then a solution that is given helps us dampen down our anxiety. So we tend to want to find solutions, and we then align ourselves with that. A number of years ago, there was an author who wrote a book entitled Risk. And in this book, he has one very intriguing chapter on Fear Incorporated, or Fear Inc. And he says we have a circuitry of fear in our cultures. And the circuitry of fear has to do with the fact that all of us have brains that operate a certain way related to fear and anxiety. So if we have something that's fear producing or anxiety producing in the environment, we tend to have our fear and anxiety rise up. He says the circuitry of fear is then also aided by the media. The media is also part of Fear Inc., he says. And then there is also organizations and individuals with an interest in stoking fears. So he simply says in the circuitry of fear, one of the three raises an alarm. The signal is picked up, repeated by the next component, and then another. The alarm returns to the original component, and a louder alarm goes off, and fear tends to amplify within a culture. Other alarms are raised about other risks, more feedback loops are created, and the unreasoning fear often begins to take hold in people. And so that fear and anxiety becomes a centerpiece of the environment culture we live in. So I think we would say that a lot of people are living with a low level. Some people are living with a higher level of fear and anxiety. The challenge becomes when we then engage in dialogue and conversation. If that fear is of a high level, we enter into the problem of people viewing those that disagree with them as threats to their very position, but also their very existence. And this is what Arthur C. Brooks writes about in Love Your Enemies. He points out that sadly, we are now in a culture of what he calls a culture of contempt, where there's a rising level of contempt towards people who hold differing positions. And the issues list is, there's a number of things in our culture now that we dialogue or converse with people or discuss with people or debate with people or argue with people or get angry with people about. Um, his point is that the greater issue and fear is that when contempt turns into disgust, you've entered into a level where you've really cut away much, if everything, related to rational reasoning, because disgust is another different level. So what we wrestle with is, how do we presence ourselves in the midst of this? And that comes down to thinking about how do we keep in view the essentials. Ronald Rolheiser wrote a book, Sacred Fire, a number of years ago, and he points out we perennially live in bitter, highly polarized times, both in society and inside organizations, inside churches. We're increasingly polarized, it seems. He says there's a perennial temptation, especially when the issue at stake is a critical one, to bracket certain essentials. And he says we often bracket respect, graciousness, and love on the basis of the cause. And in essence, we fall into a way of thinking that says this issue is so important, I need not be respectful, gracious, and loving in this instance. I may, if I so choose, totally dismiss and maybe go all the way to demonize an opponent, assassinate their character, call them a name, use everything in my power, perhaps even violence, to have my truth win out. Because I am right, and this is so important, I can bracket basic respect. Rolheiser points out that what is wrong with all of this, beyond deluding ourselves that a lack of charity and respect may be justified in the name of the gospel, all that is best within our humanity and all that is best within Christian principle call for the exact opposite. The urgency of a situation and the bitterness already inherent within it call for more, not less, care in our rhetoric and in our actions that we undertake. The more we encounter anger or disrespect or name calling, refusals for a real conversation, the more we are called to bear down on the essentials of charity, respect, graciousness, openness, and the offer of a true mutual conversation. So the challenge then is, how do you offer a true mutual conversation when, as I was in a call earlier this week, and someone said, what do you do when no matter what you say, you can't break through? There's no ears, there's no listening, there's nothing. You can still stand in a place of graciousness and respect. You can still love and care, but that often becomes a great frustration. So we wrestle with, okay, then how do I posture myself within that? So a Canadian author by the name of Gervais Bush wrote a book called Clear Leadership, and he points out that, and we deal with this in the MCL, this work on clear leadership was his observation that in most environments, most relationships, most families, most organizations, most teams, there isn't clarity, there's mush. And he uses the metaphor of mush. That is, people really don't have much insight into what their boss is thinking, what their team leader is thinking. All they know is their team leader has come and said, this is what I want. And that leads to mush. So in this book, he's devised a very elegant, simple tool, and it's simply the experience cube. It may be a way for us, in terms as far as we're concerned, to do good work of graciousness and respect, and the matter of love in the presence of others. The experience cube is, for Bush, he says this is something that is a way to think about our own self-awareness and our own communication with other people, and the vital factors of what is within our own experience cube. And that is to learn how to communicate to people in a non-anxious and non-reactive way. Here's what I'm observing, and here's what I think about these things. It's what I think, and it's what I observe. This is some of the emotion that comes in all of the things that we're dealing with these days, and maybe the topic that we've just sort of raised with each other. These are my emotions. These are the feelings I have, and feelings and emotions and thoughts are personal. They're part of our own self-awareness. And even within that experience cube, you then say, and you know what I would really want? Here's my desire in all of this. It's a way for you to frame where you stand. So what Bush then does is he says the sharing of these things and the communication of these things is actually what brings down the mush and raises up clarity. So he encourages teams to pull this out and use it when they're facing an issue. And just go around the circle, around the table, and just say, let's just, from where all of us sit right now, what are you observing? What are you thinking about this? What are you feeling about this? And what would be your aspiration? What would be your positive outcome that you would hope would happen as a result of this issue? His point is that this rarely happens in teams. What happens is that someone expresses an emotion, and it may be that they're angry or they're frightened, and that's as far as it goes. And then someone next to them says, well, you know what I think about this? I think the following. And it's mush because no one has the full sense of how did you get to that feeling? How did you get to that thought? And it comes out of our observational world, leads to thoughts and feelings, and then it also leads to what we want. He says leaders can be really bad at this because leaders often come in a room and say, folks, here's what we're going to do. This is what I want us to do. We're going to do A, B, C. And anyone got any questions? And people sometimes will ask questions, but then they'll walk out of the room and they'll wonder, how did our boss get to that conclusion? He says that's mush. He says it'd be far better for a leader to say, I'm going to share with you something that we're going to take on a certain direction, and I want to tell you the basis upon which that decision is made. I've been observing the following, and these are my thoughts related to those observations. This has led to sort of a journey through an emotional field, and these are the emotions that I've wrestled with related to this. And so out of that, this is what I want us to do. That's much clearer for people than simply saying this is what I want. So the further element of this, and we're recording this, so this is something you can go back to, but Dan, the next slide, the cube in clear leadership practice. He simply says, we need to learn how to better acknowledge our own cube. So this is your self-aware self. It's uniquely your own. And what gets lost in many discussions, dialogues these days on whatever issue it might be, is that we often immediately jump to the feeling level. We jump to the emotional level. People are triggered. They're triggered immediately to simply be defensive or to hear what you might. These days we're sort of sensing where is this person on this issue, and we're using radar of some kind to figure out because we want to. If we really have a firm position, we want to jump in and let them know how we feel about it. Yeah. So we need to acknowledge our own cube, and we're not good at this. But we need to be self-aware. Secondly, we need to walk the cube in full view of others. This is your descriptive self. So you may be in a conversation with someone and you're able to take the conversation, it continues. That's a great sign that at least the person with you is willing to just talk about it. But it's a good thing then to say, well, let me just let you know, here's where I'm standing these days or sitting these days on this, and here's what I've observed and thought about this, and here's some of the thought trail that I've gone through. Here's what I'm feeling about it, and here's what I really want. And it might be surprising. You want the same thing. You want people to be healthy and safe, and maybe you just come at it in different ways. But you walk the cube. Thirdly, and this is important, we listen through the cube for the cube of others. To say, I'd love to know what are you seeing these days, and what are your thoughts about it, and what are your feelings, and what do you want in terms of a good outcome from all this? And that encourages you to be curious and listen, and just listen deeply and listen for that which is beneath the words. And then finally, it is to focus passionately on positive intent. What is it we all want more of? And this is an appreciative self. To actually get down to ask people, what do you want in all of this? What really is your deep desire? And sometimes that may be the point in a conversation that you perhaps steer in that direction with someone when you realize you're at a place where you have different conclusions. This may be the place to go, because this gets into what really is the positive intent. What's your greatest desire in all this? And often with things, we're not talking specifically about COVID, but a lot of people will say, well, I just want people to be safe. I want people to be well. I want people to be healthy. And I don't want people to, suffer and be in pain. And I don't want people to die. And to be able at that point to probably say, I'm with you in so much in all of that. And that may be a common ground, but this work by Bush is just intriguing in view of this. And you wrestle with, how do we not bracket what Rolhai refers to as what we do is we bracket graciousness and respect, because we say, well, there's no room for that related to this vital important issue in our culture right now. That needs to be set aside. He says, no, it's even more important. And this is what Arthur C. Brooks said: commend his book to you, Love Your Enemies, because it's simply, how do we navigate a world when we're dealing with so many situations where we're sitting before people who may really not, they may hate us. How do we love our enemies? And his point as well in his book is a wonderful call for us to think about how we posture ourselves in the world. And I think even biblically, when we think about what it is, how we're to posture, what will be a peace move, what will be a wise, joyful, redemptive engagement, what will lift people up and not let them down, what will be something that we could freely and gladly share with our grandkids as a result of this conversation, or will there in any way be any unwholesomeness? Ephesians 4:29. We're to season our speech with grace and not let any unwholesome word come out of our mouths. So there are ways to think through how we posture that. So we decided we'd put this sort of in the middle as well of our conversation, because we're all navigating these things these days. And as Dan and I talked about, I think sadly, most people are going to a point of avoidance. We just will not talk anymore about these things. The other end of the spectrum is the altercation, the all-out verbal, sparring.
Yeah, doesn't help anybody when that happens. And here's the challenge for us. Most of us are in leadership positions, which means that we're kind of responsible to help a group of people have a conversation. And that's challenging, because we ourselves need to understand some of these dynamics. We have to understand ourselves and how we're coming across. And we need to model these very things that Terry's just outlined. How do we model graciousness and respect, and yet truth exploration? How do we together explore? And so this outline of a way to talk, or to even write, instead of writing a confrontational piece to your people or to your family, maybe think about doing it with an experience cube as a model. Here's what I'm observing. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm feeling about this. And here's what I would love. Here's what I want. And it just takes down those anxiety levels. But that's just some thoughts from us. And what we'd like to do now is break into two breakout rooms, and let's hear from you. Well, what have you found works for you as you have conversations? So, I tend to want to retreat. I don't want conflict. I hate conflict. And so I tend not to want to engage and make it a problem. And so this is a challenging topic for me too, to say, how do I keep my responsibility by engaging truthfully with people around me? And it's, it seems like a majority of people are afraid of conflict and just don't want to go there. That's the 40% in the middle. I just don't want to go. So just hush up, I'll just do whatever you say. And they don't want to engage in any kind of difficult conversation, because most people have found that difficult conversations don't end well. And so they had bad experience. And so they're emotionally triggered and fearful to engage in any kind of dialogue. And so this is the challenge that we're in. So maybe Donna, you mentioned what's the takeaway you got out of our breakout room, and then we'll hear from the others. What happened in your room there?
Sure. Yeah, I said my key takeaway today is really the whole idea that we need to be leaders in modeling this respectful conversation and drawing each other out and listening to others. And I feel like to some degree, because like you say, you don't want to ruffle any feathers and you don't like conflict. I think a little bit I've sometimes been abdicating in my responsibility to be a leader. So just sort of to remember I can do something to make a difference here.
And in our group, we also, it was a common discussion in a group that one of the best things to do is to ask questions rather than make statements. Ask good questions and then really listen, like actually listen, and be curious about the person. How did you arrive on that? Okay, and then just ask a good question openly, honestly. Ask a good question. And maybe that's as far as the robust conversation goes, is the ability to ask good questions. But it will bring information into the conversation rather than just conclusions. How about the other group?
We got into a huge fight. I mean, we just started, So we didn't talk after Cynthia made her comment that if you rearrange the word COVID, the word void is in the word COVID.
Oh.
So she thinks that's a tip off that COVID's not real. So we just got in a fight. No, we didn't.
And fighting words.
Actually, I want to just point out something. Dr. Desmet said, when you're in intense conversations, having some humor is very important. Terry, you are genius at that. And that
could be an escape mechanism, though. My family tells me that that's the way I handled family pressure, is that I was the one who brought the levity in. But it did somewhat, sometimes it could be avoidance.
Well, but what it does is it relieves the pressure that's in the moment. Yeah. Anxiety goes down when you laugh. Anxiety is released. Yeah. So being able to laugh at yourself, at the situation, just like what you just did there, Terry. I wish I was better at that. I don't know how to do that very well.
Brian raised a good point. He can speak to it. He raised a good point about the danger of the persecution paranoia, the totalitarian hordes are coming over the hillside, and where do you find the balance in discernment about things, and not go to the,
because that's fear-based as well.
Radical fringe. Yeah, we pointed that out. It's basically, that's a fear reaction as well. So there's fear reaction on all sides of the polarities here, and those fear reactions cause the most, name calling, the most vilifying, the conspiracy, the doom, gloom stuff. Yep.
Well, I also suggested that, the New Testament and Jesus in his life and ministry give us more than ample resources. One that came to mind recently in another context was Paul's dictum to accept one another. And that came not in a vacuum. Oh yeah, let's see. We'll just accept one another. Yeah. Anything goes. No, it was one of the desired outcomes of the very intense and heated disagreements over meat offered to idols, which we say, what's the big deal? But for them, idolatry was a huge deal. Yep. And or what they considered might be falling into idolatry. And Paul said, look, figure out what you believe about this, hopefully rested on good information and real facts, and real theological reflection. But at the end of the day, Non-negotiable, accept one another,
Mhm.
strive for the unity of the spirit, bond of peace, love one another. And of course, then Terry brought up where does truth come into this? And we all have a different sense of what truth is. And I think it's worth considering, asking the question, on what are you basing your opinion? And trying to get the grips with that, but understanding at the end of the day, we're going to have to live with what Paul says: be at peace with all people as much as lies within you.
Yeah.
And we've had to navigate this as a church, and we'll continue doing so. And I'm looking forward to retirement in a year.
Yep.
Having said that,
Yeah. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I heard from some other source at another time, not today, but I'd like to bring it out here, is that truth claims can be a real problem when you or I say, this is the facts, this is the truth, and we are adamant on it. We think we've found the truth and this is it.
Yeah.
And we get insistent on it because we think there's a moral ground to be able to insist, because now this is the truth. There needs to be some humility on our part that none of us know the 100% of the truth. We're looking for truth. We're looking for ground, for verifiable data. We're looking for actual things you can rely on. And let's be humble enough to say, here's what I'm thinking is the truth that I've understood so far. What do you think about this? How does this come across to you? What have you observed? What have you found? And the experience cube is a way of being able to just graciously bring forward and present what you think and feel without a truth claim. It's when you just come with truth claims or statements, boy, conversations don't work very well.
yeah. Cynthia made a great point about the violation of the experience cube is done on social media every minute, every second, every millisecond. Because as she pointed out, people get on social media and say, as Christians, we ... do this.
Yeah.
We should do this. As Christians, we must. And what you're doing is saying, well, and there's a lot of believers who go, I don't necessarily agree with you.
Yep.
But that's a mistake of thinking everyone has my cube.
Yeah.
And we don't. Yeah. And then people vilify that person and blast them, and then it just simply gets, as one writer says, we are never our best selves on social media.
No. So Roy, I saw a little comment just going up out there. Do you want to just bring it forward? What do you want to say?
Just that he asks people different beliefs, and he just asking questions. He gets them to think about what their deeply held beliefs are.
Okay, this is something.
I haven't checked back on him with COVID. I'll be interested to see if he interviews, people on different ends of the spectrum. But I haven't checked out his channel for probably a year, maybe or so.
So what's this guy's name?
Anthony Magnabosco. He does street epistemology.
Okay, all right.
How to get into conclusions, and it's
How do we
it's YouTube, so it's there's something interesting there for everybody.
Sure. Okay. Well, we are at our hour, so we want to respect your time. So, just want to say thank you, everybody, for engaging here today and for the conversation together. May the Lord help us to be gracious and loving and truthful in this time. If there ever is a chance, right now is the best opportunity to demonstrate godly, good, mature, emotional leadership. There's a chance for, if we can, as leaders, can negotiate this time well, you will go up in people's estimation and your leadership will become more credible. But if we are triggered and we end up just, responding exactly the same way everybody else is, it won't work well for you, for anybody. So we have this golden opportunity, and may you do it well.